Masechta Shavous, Daf Tehesai, Amar Aleph. We're starting from the second line from the top. Kol Shalei Nas B'Choleilu. In the Mishnah we learned, when they gave to the extension of the Azara, it had to be done through a Melech or a Melech Navi or Metumim Sanhedrin of 71, and with the two Teides with Bishir, with song. So we learned over there that if these extensions were not of the Azara or the city was not done through these conditions, one who entered into there would not be chayiv. Itma, so the Gemara brings a machlokes in the explanation of the Mishnah. Itma, we had learned b'chol elo tanan. The gis in our Mishnah is b'chol elo, meaning only if he fulfilled all the conditions, meaning it was done through a Melech Navi, Urim Tumim Sanhedrin, and the 71 of the Sanhedrin State was here. Only then will it be chal the kedusha. Nachman b'achas b'kol tanan. He says the gis is one of these. You don't need all of them. Either through the Melech alone, the Kohen Gadol alone, the Navi alone, the Sanhedrin alone, the Chalis Teida. You don't need all of them. When Ezra was Mekaz Yerushalayim and the Beis Hamikdash Hasheni in the time when the people from Babel went up, there wasn't the Urim and Tumim, nor was there a Melech. So the Gemara explains, how do we explain each one of the above Amaroi? Rav Huna Amar B'chol Eilu Tanan Ksava. Rav Huna says B'chol Eilu, you needed all of them in order the extension to the kedusha of the extension Bichal. Kasaba Yol's kedusha Rishena. The first kedusha that David Shleim was Mekadosh Shalayim and the Makom Hamikdash Kitchel Shaita Vikchel Lavi was sanctified at that time and for the future generations. If so, even Zman HaGolus, meaning Zman HaGolus bubble, the kedusha remained. The Ezra that was Mekadosh Yerushalayim and the Beis Hamikdash didn't need it. Mikadin, he didn't add anything because the kedusha remained for the future as well. So what was it for? Zeich b'Yavul the He did it only as a zeicha to commemorate the first kiddush, the first sanctification that was done, to be mafasim that they should watch the kiddush of Yerushalayim. Rav Nachman says no. One of these conditions were enough. Tanan, that's how he learns Pshat in the Mishnah. Rav Nachman hold that the kedusha that they originally were mekadesh in the time of David Shleima was only for that time, but not for the Zman HaChurban, because they held the Zman HaChurban the kedusha was batal as a kedusha kadesh, and as absolutely went and it was mekadesh Yerushalayim and the Beis Hamikdash the second time. Even though at that time there wasn't the Urim and Tumim, nor was there a Melech. So you have a raya from the Kedusha of Ezra that you didn't need all the above mentioned to make that the Kedusha should be chal on the extension of Eretz Yisrael, and the Beis Hamikdash. Because they absolutely didn't have anything. They didn't have the Urim and Tumim and the Melech. Eisvei, Rabbi Nachman. Rabbi Yistashai with Rabbi Nachman. Now Mishnah says, Kol Shaloi Nasis B'chol Eilu. Any, meaning the extension of the Azara that was not done with all these conditions, one who entered is not going to be chayiv. Says Yimada, but it says kol. So he says nei me'achas mekol elu. So the Rav Nachman answer, what does it mean kol? It means with one of all of these is enough to be mekadish. Toshma, come in here. The Gemara brings a right Rav Huna from the Megillah Tainis. Perik Vav and at the Sefton Sanhedrin Gimel Amid Beis, it says Abba Shol says, meaning we bring a raya now b'chol elu that you don't need all of them. Abba Shol says Shnei B'tzin, two ponds Hayu B'Har Amishna was on Har Hazesim Tachtein Al Yena. There was one close and one further out. The one closer in Niskach B'Choleilu was Niskadesh with all those conditions that were enumerated in the Mishnah in the days of the Beis Harishain. They were Mekadesh through another wall that they built around the city. And they couldn't fulfill all the Tanaim, of course, that the Mishnah enumerated, because there wasn't the Urim Tumah, nor was the Melech. And the Al-Yaina, but the Al-Yaina was not sanctified with these conditions. Only those that came up from Babel in the beginning of the days of Aishani, without the king and Urim Tumim, that they built a third wall around the pond that was further out, and they added it to the shetach of the city of Yerushalayim. So the Gemara says, in the closer part, where the Kedusha was complete, the Amaratzim entered there, ate there, Kacham Kalam, but they wouldn't eat Maisa Sheni, because for Maisa Sheni, they were very makbid. They felt, they learned on the Pasuk, Asa to Aser, Asa Beshvil Shetis Asher, in order to become rich. So they wanted to be very careful. They understood that's the way to become wealthy, is being very careful in the Afrashas Maisa. But even though, and they didn't eat even in the pond that was, which was completely mutter to eat there, Maisa Sheni. But nevertheless, they were makbid. But the Talmidim, they would eat in the pond that was Tachtoina, that was close by, because it was Niskadish with a Kedusha Gemurah. But further out, that didn't have the complete Kedusha, the Amaratzim, who entered there and ate kachim kalim shalei kedim, but they wouldn't eat ma'aser sheni. V'chaverim einachim sham loy kachim kalim loy ma'aser sheni, because it wasn't a complete kedusha. U'mipnei ma loy kitshua. Why weren't they mekadesh the further out one? Why wasn't it a kedusha gemara? Shekol sheim ma'isif alayir al azaris ala b'melech v'navi b'hurim etumim v'sadhem shalshim be'achad u'b'shtei tezu b'sher. So you see, that's why they weren't Mekadosh, because they didn't have it, all of it. And in fact, why would they Mekadosh the pond that was Al Yaina? In fact, what are you saying? Why would they Mekadosh the Al Yaina? You just said they weren't Mekadosh it. And the pshat was, why did they surround the wall around the pond Al Yaina where they weren't Mekadesh? Because that place was weak. Al Yerushalayim, Shal Yerushalayim Haisa, and it was in a high place. And it was easy for people to conquer for that side. So therefore, they closed it up with a wall for security. So you have proof in the Baraisa that we don't add on Yerushalayim and on the Mikdash, only through the conditions that the Mishnah mentions, and that's why they didn't add the Mei Maisa Sheni, and not like Rav Nachman says that you could be Mekadosh with one of these things. So you really have the Gemara. So you have a kasha on Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman says that you could be Mekadosh with one of the Tanaim. So the Gemara Tanai, this is really totally the machlokes of Tanaim. The following Mishnah, the Tanan that we learned on Mishnah, I heard from my Rebbes, when the ones that came up from Babel were building the Heichel in the Mei Ezra, they made curtains laheichel for the area of the Heichel, and curtains for the Hazaras. On the Heichel, they built walls on the outside of the Heichel. Why? Pashut. In order that the workers should stand outside the Heichel in the time of the Avodah and not be inside, and it would be a Bezoyim. But in the Azares, they would build the walls on the inside of the curtains. Rabbi Yeshua said, Shemaiti, I heard from my Rebbe, Shemakrivim, they would be Makom Kabbalas on the Mizbeach, Afapi, She'ein Bayis. Oichlin Kachikadashim b'makom hazara. Afa pishein kloim amakivim zazara. Rabbi Yeshua says, I heard from my rabbis that there were makiv on the mizbeach, even though They didn't make these curtains of walls around, and they were allowed to eat the kachim in the makam of the Hazar, even though there weren't these curtains representing themselves as rooms and as a new kedusha. And they would eat kachim kalu ma'aseh in Yerushalayim afal pi she'ein chema, even though there wasn't a wall that was surrounding the city. That means before they would build the walls of Yerushalayim. Obviously, because of the first kedusha that was from the time of David Shleima, Kitchel Shaita was sanctified for then, but Kitchel Lasid Lavi, and it was also for Lasid Lavi. So, and Gemara completes the tenets. Lab Miklal isn't then mashma the Abelazar Sava that the first kedusha like Kitchel Lasid Lavi, that Abelazar hold that it wasn't, who says that you had to have these curtains and the walls around the curtains, obviously helped that it wasn't Mikuj for Lasid Lavi. And according to Rabbi Yeshua, he held it was. So you see, it's telling the machlekes. So the Gemara slugs that up. Perhaps really everybody holds that what was originally sanctified, it was sanctified even for the future generations. He said what he heard from his Ebbers. Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Elazar heard whatever he heard from his Ebbers, he said, and Rabbi Yeshua, whatever he heard from his Ebbers, he said. But there's no machlekes. And if you want to say, if the Kedusha Rishena was not batul, why did they have to place these curtains if the Kedusha was there? They were able to be makar kabbanis even without the curtains. And when you want to it wasn't right that for the heichal that where the shulchan of Neira, the Mizbeach HaKteres was there, and the Hazara where the Mizbeach HaChitzin was, that it should be open for everyone to see, and everybody would be able to see the Kahanim doing the Aved in the Beis HaMikdash. It wasn't sneezing. That if you want to bring out a high of the machlekes, that's the machlekes, whether the Kiddusha Rishona was a Kitchulas Lavei or not. Hani Tanoi. It's these following Tanoi. Rabbi Yesi had said the Mishnah Erchin enumerates 8 cities that were Mekafes Chayma from the days of Yeshua ben Nun, and therefore it had the din of Batei Erechayma. The din of Batei Arechema was that somebody who sold a house in a city where it was Mekafes Chayma was allowed to redeem it within the year, the first year. Why did Chacham only choose these 8 cities? There were many more cities that were surrounded by wall from the days of Yeshua. Only when the Bnei Agalu came up from Bavel and they settled in Eretz Yisrael, Me'ezer, Matzu, Eila, they found these cities that were surrounded by walls, Vekitchum, and they said, okay, these are holy cities, and we have to keep to the halachas of Batei Arechema, but the other cities that were Mekafes Chema in the Bais Yishain was not Niskadish through the Bavel, but why? So if they were not Niskadish through the other Bavel, the Kedusha was Batel. Even though in the time Yeshua was holy, Yeshua Aretz, from when the Kedusha of Aretz was Nisbatel with the Chuk Mais Hadishin, so that's how the Kedusha was Batel. Alvin, so we see Kasava, Kedusha Yishena, Kitchel Shai, Kitchel Lavi. So you see from here that whatever was the original Kedusha is not for the future generations, because you see, only those 8 cities were that the Eila Bubble had re-sanctified or sanctified, but those that they didn't was batal. Or I mean, I'll ask you still on this Bryce from another Bryce. Rabbi Yishmael had said, it was the only 8 Eila, only these 8 cities bevadhayu that were Mekavas Chayma. It says in the time when Moshe and Bnei Yisrael conquered the Melucha of Oig, it says Shishim Ir Kol Chavel Argim Mamlachas Oig Melech Habash Kol Eilu Arim B'Tzuris that were fortified cities Chayim Agvaya with surrounding strong walls. So you see that there were 60 cities that were Mekabes Chayma. So why do you only count these 8? Why did the Chachamim count only these 8? Shekishol Bnei Agela, when the Bnei Agela came up from Babel, they found these 8 cities that were Makavas Chayma, Mikitchum, and they sanctified it. So the Gemara is mafsik in the words of the Braisa, and is Kitchum. They re-sanctified it. But we said at the end of the Braisa, there was no need to be Mekadosh them. So how do we learn the Lashon in the Braisa? We have to be good in the Braisa. Matzu Elo Manu. It means these 8 cities they found and they enumerated, meaning there's no din specifically that's no Yigdafke, but these 8 cities, only Chachamim found these cities when they returned from Babel that they were Makafis Chema. So therefore, right away they knew these are holy cities that from Yeshua ben Nun. But not only these cities had a din of Makafis Chema, only all cities that if they became aware of that they were surrounded by walls from the days of Yeshua ben Nun had the din of Ir Shemukavas Chayma, Kol Mitzvahs Elu, all the mitzvahs of Ir Mukavas Chayma, Nayagas Ba, even those that were not surrounded by a wall, because they held that the Kedusha Shayna, the original Kedusha, remained for Las and Lavei. So those cities that they had a Messiah that was of Mukavas Chayma from Yeshua ben Nun, even though now it was Mukavas Chayma, has the din of Ir Shemukavas Chayma. In the first Braisa, Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yasi said the Kedusha Shayna was not sanctified for Las Lavei, and in the second Braisa he paskins that Kedusha Shayna is Kitchel Las Lavei. There's 2 Tanaim that are learning according to Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yasi. One Tana says he said Kitchel Las Lavei, Kitchel Las Lavei. And in another Braisa, another Tana says no. Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yasi said it's not Kitchel Las Lavei. If you want, one of the 2 Braisas, meaning the second Braisa that says Kedusha Shayna was also for Las Lavei. Rabbi Yasi Amra. It was Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Yasi who said it, not Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yasi. The Tanya Rabbi learned in the Braisa. In Teres Kainim it says Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Yasi Haima. It's written in the Pasuk in the Gay city, which is Mekefes Chaima. It says Asher Loi Chaima. Afa Pishain Loi. Achshav, even though now there's no wall around the city. Loi Chaima with the Aleph. You can read it with a Vav, you can read it with Aleph. Loi Chaima here we're reading with Aleph. There's no wall. But prior to that, in the time when they conquered Eretz Yisrael, it was with a Vav. Loi Chaima had. So had the dinim of Ir Mukavas Chayma, because Kedusha Shayna Loi Batal Memano. But if the Kedusha Aretz was Batal after the Churban Bayis, then the Kedushas of Ir Mukavas Chayma is also Batal after the Churban. But since Rabbi Yasi paskins that the din of Ir Mukavas Chayma is Noyeg, even when there's no wall around the city today, he still says it has a din of Bater Chayma. You have to say, because he holds that the Kedusha, the original Kedusha, was never Batel. So we learned, we'll turn over on Amid base. We learned in the Mishnah Tuma, if he became coming in the Azara, and the Tumah was concealed from him, so he has to bring a Yedit. In fact, how do we know that somebody becomes Tamei in the Azara itself, that he's going to be Chai, and he was Nalam from the Tumah, that he'll be Chai Vakam Yedit? It says in one pasuk, as Mishkan Hashem Timei, that he was Metamed the Mishkan. Because Migdash Hashem Timei. First of all, you find a double lashon about being Metame the Beis Hamikdash. One says Mishkan, one says Migdash, but they're both telling you the same Hira. So what do I need a double Hira that about Venichlis? Somebody who enters who's Tamei, and he enters the Beis Hamikdash or the Azar, he's going to be Chayiv. He's going to be Chayiv. If he did it, but B'meiz he's going to be Chayiv Kares. So we say, if the pasuk is not needed to tell you if somebody was already tabe outside the Azara and he entered into the Azara, then apply this double lashon, the din of somebody who became tummy in the Azara itself, that if he doesn't go out immediately and through a shortcut, then he's going to be chayv kares. In fact, the Gemara okra meyatre. What these two psukim are extra? We need the two psukim. The Tanya we learned in the Brayso. Mishkan labanam mikdash. If it says Mishkan, why do you change the lashon mikdash? Mishkan. And if he's saying mikdash, why do you have to say Mishkan? So we said, Pashut, we need both, because if it would only say Mishkan, and it wouldn't say Mikdash, al Mishkan yechayev. On the Mishkan, you should be chayev. Because the Kiddush is much greater. It was anointed with the Shemen HaMishcha. Al Mikdash, which was not nimshach with Shemen HaMishcha, I would say he shouldn't be chayev. The Kiddush is much smaller. And even it would say Mikdash, and it wouldn't say Mishkan. You say al Mikdash, on somebody who enters the Mikdash, it's Kedushas forever. What does he mean it's Kedushas forever? So he says when the Mikdash was put up in Yerushalayim, you weren't allowed to be Makar Kabbanis on the Bamis, on the personal high stones, ever. Even after the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. Meaning, the 14 years, verses, the 14 years that in the time when the Mishkan was Gilgal, so then you were allowed to put up these Bamis. So therefore the Mikdash in a way is greater than the Mishkan. So, but you see, none of these Pesukim are extra. So after the Gemara, Rabbi Lezer says, Hachika kashalei. This is the kasha that he had on these two psukim. Machdi, let me look. Mishkan, Ikim Mikdash. Mikdash, Ikim Mishkan. Mishkan is called Mikdash. Mikdash is called Mishkan. Dichtiv, oy either be the Mikdash, oy either be the Mishkan. Let them either write in both psukim Mikdash or Mishkan. Mishkan or Mikdash, Lamali. Why does he write it two separate lishleinis? Shmami, no, in Tarte we learn two limudim. First of all, from the psukim telling us, two psukim telling us the same hira, and plus the shini aloshin, the two psukim telling us the same hira is telling you that there's a chiyuv kares of entering, whether you enter the Mishkan or entering the Mikdash, and the shini aloshin is coming to tell us the din of Rabbi Lezer that said that there's a chiyuv kares even if he became tummy only once he entered into the Azara. So Gemara wants to know from where do we see that Mishkan is called Mikdash and Mikdash is called Mishkan. Says Gemara, Bishleima Mikdash Ikim Mishkan. It's understood why Mikdash is called Mishkan. It says in the pasuk, "Nasati Mishkan v'seichem." It says, "I will place my resting place between you." From here we learn out Shakol Makom Shechina, wherever the Shechina is b'seich b'nei Yisrael, it's called Mishkan. So it's side applicable for the Mishkan and side applicable for the Mikdash. Ala Mishkan did Ikim Mikdash. Mishkan that's called Mikdash. Where do we see that? Eli, maybe we're going to say Midachsi from this that's written Midagay carrying the Mishkan when they were traveling in the Midbar. It says V'nasa Kasim Noisa Mikdash. It says that the Kasim were carrying the Mikdash and really could only be referring to the Mishkan. So he says that wasn't the Mishkan. Ahubaring that Mikdash is referring to the Aron, not to the Mishkan. Not to the whole Mishkan. Rather, from where do we learn it out? From here, that it says in the Tzibur of Hashem to Moshe on the building of the Mishkan, it says, make me a Mikdash and I shall dwell in them. And immediately after the word Vasli Mikdash, it says, so you see, right after the Vasli Mikdash, it says, the words Estavas HaMishkan, so you see, Shemishkan is called Mikdash. We learned the Mishnah Yishtachava, he's going to be Chayiv. Amar Rabba said, Leishanu. We didn't learn in the first case that one who bows a small bow, he's going to be Chayiv, even if he didn't wait the Shir of Yishtachava Gemura. Yishtachava, Klape Pnim. There we're saying the short one that you don't have to have the shish tachava is referring to bowing towards the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Was a very short bowing. But when he was bowing Litzad Mizrach, he stayed there. There was a longer Yishtachava, Kishia, Yishtachava Gemura. Only then he'll be chayv if he stayed in the Azara while being tummy, the time that it takes for Yishtachava Gemura. But if he didn't wait that period of time for Yishtachava towards Mizrach, then he's not going to be chayiv for being tummy in the Azara. Even the Masla say fathers learn the words of Rava, the end of the Mishnah. He's going to be chayiv, or he stayed the time that it takes to bow. It's mashma that the ishtachava is pulan shaches, meaning that it's the meshach's bond for the chiv of shia is even without bowing at all, just the time that it takes that is needed for it to bow. Amarava lo yishanu, that this ishtachava that we said in the end of the Mishnah was only when he was bowing towards the Mizrach. In such a case, you're not chayv on the etzem of bowing, like we explained before, rather on the waiting itself. But the shtachva that he did towards the Kodesh HaKadoshim, afagav, even though it was a fast bow, and he didn't wait the time that it takes for the hishtachava, which is probably longer. Even just the bowing itself is much shorter. So he says, and according to this, we explain like this: hishtachava klapi pnim, the bowing towards the Kodesh HaKadoshim, even if it's a short bowing, he's going to be chayiv. He's going to be chayiv for being there and bowing the short bowing while in the Azara. Or he stayed in the Mikdash the time it takes to bow. So over there, when you're talking about bowing klape chutz, which is a much longer even though he didn't actually bow, but if he stayed that time that it takes the hishtachava, then he's going to be chayiv. Less than that, he's not going to be chayiv. What's the eifin of the hishtachava gemura that there is that you're chayiv for? We're talking about that needs shehiyah at that time. What kind of hishtachava is there that you don't go according to the time that it takes to bow? The one that we're talking about, there was no the shear that there's no shia. That's talking about somebody who just bows on his knees and no more. That's it. If he bowed on his knees no more than that, while being tummy, he's going to be chayiv. This bashia is in pishut yadayim and raglayim. It's with spreading the hands and the feet, which is a longer yishtachava. Kama shia is chayiv. How much is the shia of waiting that he should be chayiv? Pligiba Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani v'chadi imei. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani and one with him, with one of his chavenim, are arguing. Umana, and who was the one that was with him arguing? Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi. I mean, others say Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi v'chadi imei. Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi and was arguing with one of his chavenim. Umana, who was that? Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmani. I mean, others say that the one that was arguing with Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi was Rabbi Shimon bar Nachmani. One of them said that the Meshach of Shia is commemorated the Psukkah, the time that it takes, the Meshach time that it takes to say this whole pasuk. One says only the Meshach of Shia from the part of the pasuk, only a part of the pasuk from Vayichel is Seifa. Only from Vayichel to the end of the pasuk. What's the lashon of pasuk? All the Bnei Yisrael saw how the fire came down. And the glory of Hashem was on the house. And they bowed with their faces to the ground. Al Aritz were on the ground. And they bowed. And thanked Hashem. Kitay, because he's good. Kilayim Chazda forever is his kindness. So the difference between the outside and the inside is much shorter. The inside was a short kneeling, but in the outside it was the shear was much longer. The time that it takes to spread out, that was a much longer shear. Now the Yibad is going to bring down different categories of Ishtachavais. Kida, which is really a very hard type of bowing. Alapayim, standing up, and he bows down on his face. Standing up from his waist down, he bows down and his face touches the ground. So it says, like it says, Basheva bowed in an upwave fashion with a face down, touching the ground. Kriya, kneeling, albekayim, that's on the knees. So it says that when Shlomo ended davening, coming of name Mizbeach Hashem, he stood up before the Mizbeach Hashem, Mikrei albekayim, from kneeling on his knees. Ishtachava is the third type, Zupish Yodayim Raglayim, that's completely spreading his hands and his feet on the ground. And so it says in Bereshis, will you then bring I and your mother and your brothers to bow completely on the ground? So there, the story with Yaakov telling Yosef that we're going to all spread out our hands and feet, there's totally me and your mother and your brothers, there's referring to totally spreading out onto the ground.